I notice you're one of the few people who maintained a critical faculty, even in the midst of the hysteria. And,
which hysteria?
The Ron Paul hysteria.
Oh,
that's what it
yes.
is. It's a cult.
Yes. No, I agree, and I appreciate that you noticed that.
I tweeted one of your tapes when you tell about the nefarious Benton, Tate, and
well, we could have a separate conversation about that. Yeah, weed. Yeah, if his background isn't enough,
you know
to
what the
make
leprechaun
you suspicious.
says? The leprechaun says, "A friend with weed is a friend indeed, but a friend with gold is the best I'm told." Me gold,
okay,
me gold.
That
was on St. Patrick's Day. Ron Paul was widely compared to the leprechaun. Lep in the hood, out to do no good.
Well, I don't know if you want to get into this, but one of the things that I've heard as a suggestion about Jesse Benton is that he was actually sent. That the reason he was cheating on a woman when he first hooked up with Ron Paul's granddaughter, Valerie, and married her in order to work his way into Ron Paul Inc. And that's pretty obvious in and of itself, but that he was actually sent by an outside agent that is why he's got Trygve V. Olsen in on the campaign in order to take the teeth out of the foreign policy part of Ron Paul's message. Do you have any insight or opinion on that?
I would say about this. I have seen published sources online, which I have not been able to verify, but they seem plausible, that Ron Paul is the champion nepotist of the House and the Senate. In other words, of all the congressmen and senators right now, he is the greatest expert on getting his own relatives on the payroll. And that would include, apparently, the figure I saw was 61 people. 61 of his relatives are either on his congressional office payroll or his campaign payroll. And that would be Benton married to his granddaughter. But I think in a larger sense, the entire purpose of his campaign is to secure a future for Rand. And Rand is out there campaigning for Romney right now, even as we speak, right? And he's made statements in favor of Romney, which amount to endorsements. And therefore, the problem that I think is tragic for the people that are here is so many of them have bought into this Ron Paul hysteria, and they're ignoring the obvious facts in the case. Now, let's bring it right down here to the Bilderberger. Peter Thiel, Thiel, or Herr Thiel, is a member of the steering committee of Bilderberg. I would say he's even more than a member of the steering committee. I think he represents the next generation of the degeneracy of this group. In other words, you have people like David Rockefeller, Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Lecomte d'Avignon, right, the European branch. These guys, they're old. They're going to be gone soon. Who's going to take over this stuff, and what will that represent? I think there's a generation of young predators who are more sociopathic than the older ones because they have no experience of war, they have no experience of the Cold War, they have no understanding of a world without derivatives, right? They think for them derivatives and the internet are like daily bread. Thiel is famous for a number of things, right? He gives young kids money to drop out of college, which I think is criminal. I mean, if you were a parent, if you know what this means, to sacrifice for decades of your life to put your kid through college, and then along comes Thiel and says, here's $5,000, kid, go drop out. Right?
Well, you really think that the modern government-supervised propaganda system is something that anybody should subject their children to?
Come on. Enough with the talking points. If you go to college and you're smart, you can always get a good education. You can learn languages, right? Those are objectively valid. You can always do something with a college education. And the other thing is, if you want to compete in a labor market, since we're so market-oriented here, market radicals, you're unemployable without a college degree.
Okay, well, let me sit back and introduce you. This is Webster Tarpley. We're here at Bilderberg, Occupy Bilderberg 2012, and I'm very excited to have an opportunity to sit down with you because, as you said, we are a bunch of market extremists here, and you're an exception to that. And you have such an incredible ability of analysis and insight. And I had you on my TV show back in the day, and I'm excited to have an opportunity to interview you now for YouTube. But if you would step back and tell us a bit about how your philosophical perspective is different from...
I got to get to the point, because I got to tell you not what you want to hear, but what you need to know.
All right.
So Thiel is out there encouraging kids to drop out. The other thing that he wants to do is to have these offshore floating extraterritorial
The Seasteading Institute project.
Okay, seasteading. Now, I just speculate, what could that mean? Right? If there's no government and no laws, what might one have? Well, how about slavery, prostitution, narcotics, child labor, no minimum wage, no health care, right? You could die.
Are you against people being able to put what they want in their own bodies? Are you against, I mean, as George Carlin would say,
come on.
Fucking is legal, selling is legal. Why isn't selling fucking legal?
I don't want to.
No, but you're raising those as objections to the libertarian communities that he's working on providing. And I would say that there are legitimate things to criticize Peter Thiel for as a member of the superclass, as a participant in Bilderberg, that while he made his wealth in the market, it was not the free market. He was a beneficiary of corporatism and all sorts of government policies that made him much wealthier than he would be otherwise.
Again, I would like to stick to the point, which is Thiel is an exponent of neo-feudalism. In other words, it's in the United States, it's still a fairly strong state. If you want to begin the subversion of the United States into mini-states, micro-states, secessionism, the destruction of society, you can start with a kind of a pilot project offshore, and then that corrosive poison would then spread, among other things.
Wait, so you would say that the central authority that we have in the United States today is good?
I'm pleased to listen to your objections, but I can't get into.
You throw out too much red meat for me. I love having these conversations with you because of that.
I can't go into the Milton Friedman, all the complete works of Milton Friedman or whatever it is you want. That seasteading business is a concrete example of the neo-feudalism that the Bilderberg group represents. These people are enemies of the modern state. Their idea is the IMF and NATO over a regionalized world of petty states, micro-states. Soros calls it partition studies, how the existing nation states will be carved.
Is he advocating for that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's the current U.S. policy. But now look,
Soros is advocating for that?
The connection is that this Peter Thiel has given $2.7 million to Ron Paul's campaign in the form of a super PAC. Yep. That by itself, it seems to me, ought to throw a whole bunch of people into a kind of cultural and moral crisis that the hated oligarchs of the Bilderberger group, right, execrated correctly in all the world, they're paying for something with Ron Paul. What are they paying for? Two things. One is the spreading of ideological poison. In other words, to make Ron Paul's Restore America economic program, to make that presentable implies a huge downshift in the morality and intelligence of the American people. The kind of stuff that Ron Paul has would have been laughed out of the room in the 1950s. It would have been barbaric. It would have been a relic of the barbaric and primitive past. So,
unless your name was Goldwater.
Ron Paul is, which he did, right? Which he was spreading, right? And he was, justly defeated. So Ron Paul is spreading the poison. The other thing, of course, with Ron Paul is Ron Paul was a kind of an auxiliary to the Romney campaign. Very clear. In the Republican primaries, you're going to have 40% country club establishment voters, neocons, whatever. And then you're going to have 50 or 60% of anti-establishment Tea Party, whatever they are. The danger to Romney was that he could get a significant part of the 40%, but there was always the danger that the rest of them would unite around some rival. What Ron Paul did was to take 10, 15, sometimes 17% of the vote and put them in the deep freeze, right? Put them, essentially lock them up where the sun doesn't shine, because this is a candidate who could never be the Republican nominee and who could never be president. But the effect that he had was to take them off the table. So instead of, Santorum, I mean, there were a couple of them, like the Ohio primary and the Wisconsin, I think, where Santorum was defeated by Romney by a very small majority. That's essentially Ron Paul helping Romney over the hump, because a lot of those people radicalized
by taking a chunk away from Santorum.
Yeah, in other words, by locking those votes up where Santorum could never get them. Then there's a deeper level, right? Ron Paul represents the Scottish Rite Southern jurisdiction of Freemasonry, right? The old Confederates, the Dixiecrats. Romney represents Mormonism, which is, I would call it a kind of Freemasonry with a veneer of religiosity over the top. The one thing that they have in common is anti-black racism, right? We know Ron Paul's newsletters. These cannot be denied. And then we have in the Mormon the Book of Mormon, the idea is that the black population of the earth are the descendants of the people who sided with Lucifer in the great contest between Lucifer and Jesus, and that planet Kobold or Kolob or wherever it is. So this is all a very cynical thing. Now, the verification of this would have been if Romney had needed Ron Paul's delegates to go over the top to get the 1144, he would have had them.
But we won't see that at this point, is what you're saying.
I don't think we will, because Romney has made it sort of on his own. But at that point, the swindle that would have been carried out would have been to say, okay, Romney's going to get these votes. He's going to put Rand Paul on there as vice president, and therefore delegates, Ron Paul would make an appeal to his delegates, come out and support my little son. He's such a wonderful guy, and all this stuff. And the son, Rand Paul made pilgrimages, according to published sources, to meet William Crystal of the Weekly Standard, to pledge that he would not be doctrinaire and reject a war with Iran, but he would be open to a war with Iran.
Well, and as he's shown, he already voted for the sanctions, which was the first act of war against Iran.
He votes for economic warfare. So I think this is tragic. And in 2008, my function was to say to people, stop Obama. Don't believe Obama. It's a fraud. Don't be duped. And now it's similar. It's a somewhat more limited phenomenon, but still, it's a phenomenon that tends to take a lot of people out of circulation who would have been valuable. In other words, who would have been exactly the people you need for serious organizing. It basically brings them back to the Republican Party. You can see Rand Paul, when he made his de facto endorsement of Romney, he said, oh, my dad, he's been building the Republican Party, right? And he's got a lot of people, a lot of you guys are registered Republicans now, where after Bush, maybe you were like me, after Bush I said, I'll never vote for another Republican in 5,000 years. And they said, oh, that's sectarian. I said, all right, 3,000 years. I won't vote for a Republican for 3,000 years. That would have been a good resolution for you guys to make. So I think this is a swindle. This is a controlled opposition. You've got to grasp this. I know it hurts.
Well, now you're not suggesting that are you suggesting that it's deliberate on Ron's part to play into this, or that he's being promoted as controlled opposition because he is creating something that is controllable?
Yeah, I mean, to psychoanalyze him, I wouldn't know how to do that. But I would just point to one thing, right? Why is this important? You look at that Restore America plan, right? The savage cuts, the $1 trillion of cuts, right? The Pentagon budget gets cut 15%, which is what Obama's doing already. Obama cuts plus automatic sequester minus 15%. So Ron Paul is giving you no extra Pentagon cuts, but he wants to cut food stamps by 62 to 63%. So right now, food stamps might be average, according to Chef Mario Batali, $31 a week per person per week. So that's about $1.50 per meal. With Ron Paul's cuts, it would go down to 58 cents per person per meal. 58 cents for a meal. Now that's going to be beans, spaghetti. That's a recipe for rickets, pellagra, scurvy. I call him Pellagra Paul because his program will inflict pellagra. And that means genocide against the American people. And this is where I draw the line. My whole activity is I'm trying to defend anybody against genocide, and all the more so, I got to try to defend the American people against economic genocide. Now, you look at the Supreme Court, the way it's lining up. You look at the election, the way it's lining up. I think the U.S. ruling class and the British are interested in a hard right, quasi-fascist turn. They want to say, not only is there no Obamacare, we'll have an obiter dictum, right, when they add what they want to say. There's no Medicare, there's no Medicaid, there's no unemployment benefits, there's no Head Start, there's no S-chip. You're going to die. In other words, we're stripping away all of your gains from centuries of labor struggles and political struggles. The economic rights of the American people are going to be stripped away. And I know you guys believe the American people don't have any economic rights, and that's where we come to the parting of the way.
Where would you think that we don't believe individuals have economic rights? Because that's what we champion.
You have no right to health care. You have no right. You have no economic rights.
Okay, well, let's get to the heart of the issue here, because there's so many things in what you said that I'd love to address, so many specific things I'd like to defend from the libertarian perspective, but I do want to bring it back to Bilderberg, but I'll use one of the things you said to make a point first. You said that, first of all, that Bilderberg is the enemies of the current system of government, and while they might not find it optimal...
They're transforming. It's always transforming, right? They're always degrading. They're always, downshifting. They always want people to be stupider, governments
exactly.
to be weaker,
I would say
oligarchs to be stronger, neo-feudalism